Hello, everyone. Man, this is awesome. We have 153 people on this event with Richland Rum for Savvy.co. My name is Will Hookinga from AmericanRumReport.com. And joining me all the way from Georgia and California, you can see them at the bottom of the screen down there. We have Erik Vonk, founder of Richland Rum, and John Milstead, Executive Vice President of Sales and Marketing. Guys, we've got a lot of people joining us right now. Very exciting. Say hello to everyone and tell them how you're doing right now.
Hey, hello everybody from Richland, Georgia. Great to be on with everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to have such a good audience, and I saw a lot of familiar names in the group out there. So hello to everybody that knows us and knows me. And I see Mr. Dayton in Las Vegas. Good job. A lot of people. Good.
Yeah, that's been the really cool thing about doing these live streams is how many people end up coming who have met each other. The rum community is so strong, and it's one of the things I love about it. So we're going to get started in just a minute. Before we do, I want to go over the agenda with everyone real quick and give you kind of a tour of how the platform works here, so you guys can be able to ask questions and stuff like that. So first of all, you've probably already noticed on your screen that there's a chat window on the right. We've got people saying hello from all over the place: San Jose, California, Georgia, Las Vegas, Park City, Utah, Hawaii, France. That's pretty amazing. So yeah, say hello, tell us where you're from. Also, at the center of the screen in the bottom, you should see a little button that says Ask a Question. That is the question box. If you have a question that comes up at any point in the presentation for either Erik or John, you can put your question in there. And at the end of this, the last 10 to 20 minutes or so, we're going to do a little bit of Q&A. So yeah, oh, and also at the top right of your screen, you should see a share button. So if you want to invite friends to join us to come hang out, you can click that button, share on social media, or send the link directly to people. So as I said, we're going to take about 30 to 40 minutes today to talk about Richland Rum, and then have a little Q&A at the end. So first of all, I want to talk about Erik and John for a second, give them a nice little introduction. So Erik, I know you have been making rum for over 20 years now, if I remember correctly. Richland has grown to the point that it's available in 15 states and 15 countries. So I think, you know, when you look at the American rum landscape, it's definitely, to me, one of the first distilleries that jumps out, not only because of the longevity, but also because of the way you guys produce your rum there, which we're going to talk all about in just a few minutes. And then John, meanwhile, I know you're a more recent addition to Richland. John, you joined the company at the beginning of this year, correct?
That's correct.
Excellent. So we're going to talk about a little bit of what your role in the company is and how the market has reacted since you've come on. So we're going to get to that later on. But to kick things off, Erik, I think the best way to start is to ask the question of how did you decide to start a single estate rum distillery in Georgia?
That's a great question, Will. An honest answer is that there's probably been a short circuit up here somewhere a long time ago, more than 20 years ago. Frankly, I've had this probably grandfather's inspired idea for decades to grow sugarcane for the purpose of making rum. And that was inspired by my mom's dad, who had an enormous collection of rums from all around the world, but they were all agricoles. They were all rums made directly from pure sugarcane. And Grandpa, even at a young, impressionable age, used to tell me rum is distilled waste. Referring to what he saw in a sort of denigrating way, molasses rums. And that has always stayed with me. And for decades, I had this idea that, hey, if there's ever an opportunity to acquire some land, grow sugarcane, I'll do that as a hobby. And on a fall day, probably somewhere in the mid 90s or so, while living in Atlanta, somewhere here in the area between Richland and Albany, along the road, there was a guy crushing sugarcane and reducing it, boiling it down to syrup. And I drove by and I thought, there's a guy crushing sugarcane. And I thought, there's a guy crushing sugarcane. I had no idea that sugarcane would grow here in southern Georgia, right, even while living up north in Atlanta. So I pulled a Huey and stopped and asked the guy. He said, "Hey, where do you get your sugarcane?" And he pointed behind him and he said, "Duh," and there was a sugarcane patch behind him. And you know, the rest is history. That sent us on a mission to see if we could acquire some land, and which we were able to do in, I think, in 97 or 98 or so. And in 99, we started growing sugarcane, and very small patch, maybe a quarter of an acre, and the next year half an acre, and expanded from there. And the rest is history. It was never intended to be a business. It was just the realization of a long dream / desire, right, to do that. And after making years of making undrinkable crap, it gradually became better and better. And friends and family visiting the farm. This was more in 96, 97 time frame. I have already to go back to what the exact years were, but I said, why don't you make it commercially available? And sort of begrudgingly over the years did that. And in 99, it became a tiny little official business. And it has very slowly but surely continued to expand from there.
Yeah, well, I know many people across the country are certainly glad that it expanded so that they can get their hands on some Richland rum now. And I think in the slide that we have up right there, people can see some of that land where y'all are growing the cane. I believe that's a picture of you and your wife, Karen. And then we have the two buildings in both Richland and Brunswick. So I know you have a presence in 2 different cities in Georgia now, correct?
That's correct. Will, about 2.5 years ago, we were able to open the second distillery on the top right of the screen in Brunswick, Georgia. Very soon after that, the city of Brunswick has changed its name to Brunswick with an M.
Very clever.
It's been no, but that's been a very fortunate set of coinciding circumstances, where our distiller here in Richland, who's been there for more than a decade, Roger Zimmerman, has a son, Robbie Zimmerman.
Oh, I see him in the chat over there.
Lived in Brunswick for a long time.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah, and he saw had an enormous amount of interest in what his dad did, and became an apprentice, and is now our distiller in Brunswick.
Wow, that's awesome. Very cool. So I'm curious to know, you know, we talk about this term single estate rum. How do you define single estate rum? Because, you know, we're seeing more and more producers in the US starting to grow their own cane. I know people have different ways of defining it. What does single estate rum mean to you?
You know, first and foremost, it is something much broader than the infamous farm to table referrals. The two are often used interchangeably. Single estate rum or a single estate wine or product means from my farm to your table. and not from somebody else's farm, and I have, green farm products, and that is what I'm using to create a farm-to-table product. We are rum farmers. We actually grow our cane, cultivate it, harvest it, grind it, reduce the juice to syrup, ferment the syrup, distill it, age it, and bottle it. Really much more than field to glass, from our own field, our own farming practices to your glass. That is what I see as single estate. We sometimes, of course, have people who contact us and say, hey, we are making single estate rum too, and then after a discussion, a little bit of a further investigation, it means that there's a batch in the fall of the year where they use a batch of sugarcane that they've grown themselves to make one batch of single estate rum. And okay, that's undeniably a single estate batch of rum. But as far as I know, there is no one else still in the United States like us who continuously produce a single estate product from our own grown sugarcane. That's all we do. That's the only thing we do. We never make anything else from anything else. And so as far as I know, we are still the only continuously single estate rum producer in America.
So a lot of times people, and I put a slide up, by the way, it shows some of the cane fields right there. A lot of times people see, it's a rum distillery. They're growing their own cane. They're crushing it. This is like rum agricole, right? Like I've seen people describe Richland as an agricole style rum, even though I know that's not really the case. Can you explain the distinction for people?
Yeah, often that's a good question, Will, and we hear that often. People visiting the distilleries or the farm, or just happy consumers of our products, say, hey, this is really an agricole, right? Why don't you put that on the bottle? And we always say, no, it's not an agricole. The distinction agricole is French, is valid in French jurisdictions, like in France and the French Caribbean, not anywhere else. Number two, if you then look into what under agricole the definition is under French law, it means that you make your rum within a certain amount of hours after crushing the cane from the fresh juice. And then there are other defining factors there. We don't do that. We do not live in the tropics. We live in South Georgia. Sugarcane is a tropical grass. You can cultivate it, or at least certain varieties where we are in our geography, but you are subject to one harvest a year. In the tropics, you can harvest on a continuous basis. We cannot do that. So what we have to do is harvest the rum, wish that were true, the sugarcane.
Right.
Usually around Thanksgiving, crush it and condense the syrup or the juice to syrup. We just heat the juice, let water evaporate until it condenses to a syrup with a sugar content of about 80 bricks, and then use the syrup that we store all year. We deplete our inventory up to the next harvest. So every year the trick is, and the prayers are, to have enough sugarcane to make enough syrup to last us for a whole year. Long story to say that an agricole can be called an agricole when it's made in France or its territories in the Caribbean or elsewhere in the world, and has to meet within those jurisdictions a number of qualifications that we wouldn't meet. So no, this is not an agricole. It is a single estate rum, and that is much more than a field to glass product. I hope that creates the parameters approximately.
For sure. And I'm going to show everyone, there's a little button at the bottom now. It says visit Richland. So I know that y'all do tours and things like that. And we'll get into that a little bit later on the status of everything. I know with the ongoing crisis, but check out Richland's website, go there. And yeah, I think it's really interesting. I know as a rum consumer, someone who avidly follows the scene across the country, it's really exciting to me to see more and more people interested in cultivating their own cane and doing that. I know Kyle Rutner in the chat over there mentioned he's from Kohana Distillers over in Oahu. They're doing some interesting stuff with their own farm. So I think, you know, something that you guys started all the way back in '99, I hope is a model that we continue to see elsewhere as well, because it's such a great way to experience something that comes from the land. And it's great to see people's different approaches to it. So you alluded to this a little bit about what's kind of unique about growing sugarcane in Georgia, which, as you said, is like usually a surprise when people find out that sugarcane can grow in Georgia. What's unique about growing sugarcane where you're located? Can you go a little deeper into that and sort of the challenges that come with it, and what you guys have to do in order to be able to harvest enough cane every year?
Yeah, thank you. Again, it is a challenge. We are, of course, way north of the tropics. So not every sugarcane variety will grow here or do well here.
Right.
There are certain varieties, though, that do well, as you still can see on a larger scale in southern Florida. And also primarily in Louisiana. What is interesting is that the key variety that does well in this part of the hemisphere is a variety called POJ. That stands for, it's Dutch. It happens to be, you know, I'm from Dutch origin. It stands for Proefstation Oost-Java, means testing station Eastern Java. This is a variety that was developed on the island of Java in Indonesia, and was brought to Louisiana in the 1800s by Dutch migrants, and happens to be a variety that continues to thrive, and that is what we are primarily using. We are using one or two other varieties, but primarily we use POJ sugarcane. We plant sugarcane in September, October. By the way, sugarcane is planted by the top left picture shows sugarcane stalks on a cart, by chopping stalks and just planting them horizontally in the ground, about 6 inches deep. Sugarcane, like bamboo, has rings on it, and each of those rings will develop new shoots, like on the right bottom picture.
Yeah, fascinating.
When you plant it in our when you plant it in our region in September, October, it will develop a probably 24-inch little plant by December, and come December, January, we usually have some nights with frost, which will kill the little plant above the ground, but it will leave the root system alive. And as soon as frost disappears by February, a new shoot will come up and the root system will have already developed. And then we let it grow until approximately the end of November. Usually Thanksgiving is a central date in our harvest season. And then we harvest it. Sugarcane, in also this variety in our hemisphere, usually has 2 to 3 ratoons, i.e. when we cut it in the fall, it will come back for 2 or 3 more consecutive years. Then we have to dig up the roots and replant.